Thank you very much again, Isaac. The next speaker is Shannon Werntz. She will be joining us virtually. She's from Carnegie Mellon University, and she will be talking to us about agent-based modeling of uninformed individuals within polarized groups.
Yes, hello everyone. Let me turn on all of my technology. All right, can I get verbal confirmation that you can see my screen and hear me in Toronto?
Yes, we can hear you and also see your slides.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, so my name is Shannon Werntz. I am a May 2022 bachelor's graduate of Carnegie Mellon University's Social and Decision Sciences Department. And last fall, I completed this research under the guidance of Dr. Daniel Oppenheimer. So our research, like all great cognitive science research, is inspired by fish. Yes. Let me give you some background. So I approached Dr. Oppenheimer a year and a half ago, interested in group decision-making research, and this was kind of our highest level mental overview of some conclusions in the literature. First, groups usually outperform individuals. This is for several reasons, one being through diversity of experiences and expertise. It's rational for a collective to improve their performance when more relevant information and experience is available. But this improved performance does come with a cost, which is inefficiency. Groups naturally have coordination costs and noise. They're going to be more time and money intensive to facilitate. And these things are especially true for polarized groups who often spend a lot of time not coming to a conclusion. I'm sure we can all think of political environments where that's the case, for example. And in many instances, inaction is objectively worse than any one chosen action would be, which is kind of the Achilles heel of group decision-making. So this was really our target of interest. How do we make polarized groups more efficient and able to come to a decision? We might look over at the pros side of this slide and say, maybe we need to add in even more diverse knowledge to a group or try to prime some of these other known strengths of groups, something like that. But the one thing that you would never do, according to traditional theory, is add an uninformed member to the group. That's only going to add more of those coordination costs and noise to slow down the group without contributing any helpful diversity of information. But there is a really interesting study out of the ichthyology literature that suggests otherwise, which is largely what inspired our research. So Dr. Ian Cousin led a group of researchers who were studying polarized schools of golden shiners, which is a species of freshwater fish. They wanted to see how these fish, which are naturally, they have a really strong biological schooling desire, how those fish would handle competing personal interests. And the way they did that was by training individual fish to have a preference to swim towards either a blue or yellow target in opposite corners of the tank, like you can see on the right here, and then combining those trained subgroups and seeing the resulting behavior. It turns out that this species of fish has a pre-existing bias towards the color yellow. So when they put 5 blue biased fish and 5 yellow biased fish in a school together, the school would always be pulled toward the yellow target. And even when there were more blue biased fish in that school, the yellow subgroup still won sometimes. So they called that yellow subgroup a loud minority. And the most interesting result is that when they added uninformed or untrained fish to this school with a loud minority that was winning, those untrained fish could bring the school back towards what they called a more democratic result, which was the blue target, because it seemed like those fish were strengthening the conformity and schooling pressure to an extent that overcame that stronger yellow bias. We thought this result was really interesting. I don't know much about fish, but we wanted to kind of analogously see if uninformed individuals could be the key to overcoming polarized human groups. So our overall research question was, under what conditions can uninformed individuals improve group decision-making? In this particular study, we aim to kind of find a base condition where uninformed individuals do provide some utility to group outcomes, and we just started to explore boundary conditions to that utility. We did so through an agent-based model in NetLogo that rebuilds Cousin's study with known human behavioral theory mechanisms, specifically a reference to decision field theory through sequential sampling for preference updating. And one aspect of Cousin's study that we thought was still applicable to human groups as well is this tension between individualistic desires or beliefs and then conformity with the group. So we wanted to maintain that in our work. So we simulate this concept of polarized group decision-making in a physical option space that has two outcome targets. Circled here, we have target A on the left being red and target B on the right being blue. The agents surrounding these targets are colored according to their initial bias and current information, which I'll cover more on the next slide. An agent's location in this space represents their preference between outcomes A and B, and their location is going to change over time based on the current information that they hold. And finally, the goal in this space, what we called consensus, is when the whole group clusters at one of the two outcome targets. So diving a little deeper into how an agent's bias, information, and preference location interact, I'll first reiterate the highest level process, which is that an agent's location in the preference space is updated over time through their current information. Each time period consists of two steps. So first, all agents update their current information variable, and then all agents simultaneously move their preference based on that new current information. As you can see in the little variable diagram to the right, an agent's current information exists within 5 stepwise options, this purple bar. So it goes from -1, which is providing strong support for the red outcome A, all the way to +1, which is providing strong support for the blue outcome B. An agent's starting current information is going to align with their initial bias. So red agents have strong information for target A and blue agents have strong information for target B. And our green agents, our uninformed guys, are in the middle right at 0. Updating of that current information over time is completed through one of two mechanisms which represent that tension between an individualistic desire and group conformity. So on the individualistic side, agents have a bias strength for that initial bias between 20 and 50%, which we found to be the range of impact. And with that probability, they are going to simply sample their own initial bias and update their current information towards that bias if possible. So a red agent who already has current information of -1 is just going to stay at -1, but a blue agent who, say, has a current information of 0 would move one step towards the B target extreme and jump over to 0.5. So that self-sampling might happen, or otherwise the agent is going to conform to the group through sampling another agent and updating their current information towards that agent's current information. I think of that just like talking to another individual in a group, exchanging information, and then that potentially changing your current opinion. We know from some studies, like Goldstone 2013, that the network structure used for this sampling can change the effectiveness of a cooperative group. So we did try a couple different sampling methods. We did simple random sampling. We had a couple pretty complex methods of sampling based on agent type and their current location, but we didn't see significant changes in overall model results. And the results that I will be showing today were utilized a weighted sampling where each agent's weight was the number of other agents located within a 3-unit radius from them. So I kind of called this the popularity weighting method. So those are our two updating mechanisms. And then all agents are going to move one unit towards the target aligned with their current information. So towards red if their current information is negative, and towards blue if their current information is positive. And as I mentioned before, consensus happens when agents are all clustered near one of the targets. And if that doesn't happen within 200 time periods, the trial is deemed no consensus. One last visualization to show how current information changes over time. This is the best display of the sequential sampling that was used in this model, because even though an agent's current information is updated every period, that might not qualify for a change in behavior in motion around the preference space. So at time period 1, we see everyone at their starting current information at the extremes for red and blue and right in the middle for green. And then each time period, their current information changes and builds these curves. When an agent's current information lands in the top half of this graph, they are going to move towards the blue target in that time period. And if it's in the bottom half, they will move towards the red target. So for example, if we look at time period 7 here, the blue biased agent is going to be moving towards the blue target, but the other 2 agents are going to be moving towards the red target. All right, putting those pieces together, this is what our model looks like. I can alter the number of individuals in each subgroup, the strength of initial bias for the red and blue subgroups, and the number of trials to run. And now, hopefully, I can show you the model in action and kind of preview the results that we found. So this is what the model looks like. I'm going to start by showing you a polarized and unbalanced group. So what I have here is I have 8 red agents, 8 blue agents. The red agents have a bias strength of 20%, but the blue agents have a bias strength of 40%. So we can kind of guess what's going to happen to this group. I'm going to start them on a trial really quickly. Hopefully you all can see this moving. What we see is that our 2 groups initially go towards the target of their initial bias, and then cluster together, and they ended up at the blue target in that trial. We see that happening again. I'm going to speed this up a ton such that you can't even see them moving, but I just ran 200 trials. What we see is that the blue outcome won 170 times, red won 20 times, and 9 times there was no consensus. So let's balance out that polarized group a little bit. I'm going to do that by changing the red strength up to 40% as well. So we just have 8 red guys, 8 blue guys, and they all have a bias strength of 40%. Running 200 trials really quickly, we see that now we got 64 wins for the red outcome, 63 wins for the blue outcome, and 73 of those trials did not come to a consensus. So this is the exact problem that we wanted to model, this high rate of no consensus, and hopefully overcome with our data. So one way that we did that is adding in some uninformed individuals. I'm going to add 8 just so we have equal groups, and do 200 trials and see what happens here. Oh, wow. That might be one of our outlier cases. So let's see, I'm gonna run it again. So we had 90 wins on the red side, 73 wins on the blue side, and 37 no consensus wins. What I generally see here is that our number of no consensus trials is about cut in half when we introduce uninformed individuals. So that is a little sneak peek of our data. And I will now talk about the parameters that we ran for our actual analysis. So we ran 2 group sizes, one where the biased subgroups each had 6 members, which we called the small group, and one where they each had 20 members, which we called the large group. For each of these group sizes, we ran 500 simulation trials at every combination of a bias strength between 20 and 50, and a number of uninformed agents that was between 0 and 3 times the biased subgroup size. So for example, between 0 and 18 for the small group. Our main hypothesis was that uninformed agents would help these polarized groups overcome their polarization and actually reach a consensus. So we had 2 outcomes of interest related to that. First, we looked at the proportion of trials that resulted in a consensus outcome at either target. And then within just those trials that did come to a consensus, we also looked at the speed of consensus measured in the number of time periods necessary for consensus. I'm going to start with the boring results, which was just a manipulation check to show that bias strength is extremely important to both of our outcomes of interest. Between a bias strength of 20 and 50%, on the left, we can see that a group's chance of coming to a consensus at all goes essentially from certain success to certain failure. And on the right, we see that the time needed for consensus in those successful trials quadruples. So bias strength is important. This slide is really our showstopper, which is the main effect from the number of uninformed agents. So these two graphs show the opposite trends of what traditional theory might expect, because on the left, we see that more uninformed agents increases the probability of consensus for our polarized group. And on the right, we see that among those consensus trials, the speed of consensus also increases because the number of time periods needed for consensus is decreasing. So if there's one takeaway from this talk, this is it. Uninformed individuals are making consensus both more likely and faster for polarized groups in our model. Some secondary results. We also looked at interaction effects between the number of uninformed agents and initial bias strength. Both of these show slightly upward trending data. So that's interpreted to say that when our biased agents have a higher bias strength, it is going to take more uninformed agents to overcome that bias and promote both more probable and faster consensus. And finally, just a note on boundary conditions, because one that we found was group size. All of the previous graphs I showed were for our small group, but this slide is data from our large group of 20 individuals per bias. On the left, we see similar results in terms of an increased probability of consensus with each uninformed individual, but the trend of increased speed that we'd hope to see on the right is essentially reduced to noise. We don't see a strong trend there. So it's interesting to see that one of these effects was retained while the other isn't, and this is just kind of one peek into boundary conditions of the model. In terms of future work, of course, we need to empirically test this model to validate it and figure out what those boundary conditions are in applied instances. We did design a study for this in summer 2021, but could not run it because of the pandemic. We also built this model so that it was easy to expand in terms of varying group size or bias strength between our different subgroups, adding more targets, or defining success as a particular outcome instead of just coming to any consensus. And then, of course, that empirical testing is going to choose particular applications, such as determining optimal work group makeup and the importance and use of neutral voters in political polarization. All right, special thanks to Dr. Oppenheimer for his guidance on this research, and then I will go ahead to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Shannon. So we have time for one or two quick questions. So please step up to the microphone, or also we take questions from the chat if there are any.
Can I? Okay. Yeah, great talk. Thank you. I love Ian Cousin's work, and I'm really thrilled to see how you picked that up. I was wondering, first of all, if I remember correctly, Ian's work was a lot about how uninformed individuals actually bring back power to the majority. You showed that it allows for much more often a consensus. So the benefit of uninformed individuals was to find easier consensus. Did you find something similar like him, that uninformed individuals also support the majority?
Yeah, so we played around with differing group sizes and bias strengths, and we did find kind of preliminary support for a weak majority winning with the help of uninformed individuals against a strong minority. So we didn't have quite the analysis to include that in this batch of research, but we did find some support in that same direction.
Yeah, cool. I'm very much looking forward to further results.
Okay, thank you very much again, Shannon. I think we can start off with the next speaker, which is Sina Fasipur from Northeastern University, and he will talk to us about diversity and homophily in social networks.